She disguised herself as a man and became a buffalo soldier. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to cover another legendary figure from the Old West that almost nobody knows. This individual's name is Cathay Williams, spelled with two A's, and she has nothing short of an extraordinary story. Cathay was born in 1844 in Independence, Missouri. Her mother was a slave, but her father was a freedman. Even though that was the case, upon her birth, she was born as mere property. The rules of the time allowed that if one of your parents, especially your mother, was a slave, then you were too. As a child, she grew up working on a plantation in Jefferson City, Missouri, and that's going to become a very important fact in her life. In 1861, Philip Sheridan and the Union Army captured Jefferson City, Missouri. And because this was the case, they would try to take all of the slaves that they had captured as contraband, and that's the way the Union Army treated them, as basically you would treat anything else that you captured of value, guns, cannons, gunpowder, or food, and they put her to work. You see, she's had to work as a cook, wash person, and seamstress to be fed by the Union Army. The interesting part about that was that also meant she was sort of a camp follower or went on campaign with the Union Army, and she saw, as a camp follower, many engagements throughout the rest of the Civil War. She would survive the Civil War, and of course, upon the end of it, all of the slaves were freed. The issue with that was, how would you make a living when you had spent your whole life as a slave? At that time, more than 3/4 of them could not read or write. They had really no hope of earning a living at some sort of job. They owned no property. So the only thing that they really could do was some sort of sharecropping work, or basically life as another indentured servant. Like a lot of blacks, that didn't have a huge appeal to Cathay Williams. So then she did an amazing thing. She disguised herself as a man and became a buffalo soldier. Believe it or not, she flipped the two names. She became William Cathay and basically disguised herself as a man. One of the ways that she was able to do this was Cathay was unusually large for a woman at the time, right around 5'9", so that kind of helped. The other thing that sort of played into her success in this deception was that even though you got a physical to join the army, it was basically a physical of whether you could see, whether you could hear, and you were able-bodied, meaning that they didn't strip you down and closely inspect you in any sort of way. In fact, whether you were white or black, joining the infantry at that period of time basically meant you were another form of government pack mule. And as long as you weren't in immediate danger of dropping dead on the trail, you were plenty good enough. So, on November 15, 1866 in St. Louis, Cathay successfully joined the United States Army. And this is where we need to spend a little bit of time talking about buffalo soldiers. We mentioned briefly why they would join. Some of them obviously joined because it was the only way that they had to earn a living and eat. And some of it, like everybody else, was for the adventure of it all. Initially, there were 6 regiments of buffalo soldiers that were founded by the government, and it was eventually cut down to 4. One of the things that I learned while researching this video was my belief prior was that all of the buffalo soldiers were mounted. This is in fact not true. They had 2 regiments of cavalry and 2 regiments of infantry. Cathay would join what was known as the 38th Infantry Regiment. Of course, that meant the regiment of foot. You walked everywhere. And that will also become an important fact in Cathay's life. At the time, they weren't known as buffalo soldiers. That came later when they would encounter Native Americans in battles on the plains. The Native Americans had a lot of respect for the ability of those soldiers and named them, sort of nicknamed them, after an animal that they respected greatly, the buffalo. One more thing about buffalo soldiers. In 1899, they would become the first park rangers at Yosemite in California. A lot of people are unaware of that. The government just sort of made parks, and they didn't have a plan for who would help people out that got in trouble at the park, sort of act as police at the park, and essentially be park rangers. The first ones were, in fact, buffalo soldiers. Now, On with our story. It's quite likely that ever before enlisting in the Army that Cathay had a lot of health problems. People kind of theorized that she had a touch of diabetes at the time, and there was really no treatment for it. You just sort of symptomatically got yourself better. So from St. Louis to her final duty station in New Mexico, she would enter at least 4 hospitals for major illness. Believe it or not, her regiment walked from Kansas to New Mexico, a distance of more than 500 miles. And that arduous living over the next 2 years took a giant negative toll on Cathy's life. It was during one of these hospital stays that a doctor finally discovered her to be a woman, not a man. And I think we need to spend a little bit of time talking about what that deception would have taken. She shared every hardship that everybody else did all along her military service. The grueling patrolling, the marching day and night, the endless drilling, the bad food, and of course, the bad lodging. This would be enough to break the health down of a healthy person, let alone somebody that already came into the game, so to speak, with some challenges. Interestingly enough, when they discovered that Cathay was in fact a woman, she wasn't prosecuted by the government in any way. They just basically gave her an honorable discharge and sent her on her way. Later in her life, or after her discharge, which was in 1868, she had initially signed for 3 years, but of course couldn't complete that enlistment. She wandered all over the Colorado, northern New Mexico area, sometimes working in a hotel, sometimes as a seamstress, and sometimes as a cook. In 1876, a St. Louis newspaper became aware of the first female buffalo soldier, and they did an interview on Cathay. This is really the foundation of what we know about most of her life, even though most of it remains obscure. Some anecdotal information for you out there. Cathay told the newspaper reporter in 1876 that there were only other 2 people that knew that she was actually a female when she was serving with the Buffalo Soldiers. And they were both a cousin and a friend who were actually camp followers of the Buffalo Soldiers and kept her secret. That's a remarkable sort of factoid if you think about it, how much danger they were actually in for Cathay to continue to serve as a Buffalo Soldier. A writer named Philip Tucker wrote a book on Cathay Williams, but the specific details to her aren't really there because they're unknown. He would talk about things that happened where she would happen to be at a very specific time. But as far as the nitty-gritty details of her life, a lot of it remains lost to history. As Cathy's life progressed, her health continued to fail. In 1889 or 1890, she was hospitalized and several of her toes were amputated due to her diabetes. Somewhere around 1891, she officially petitioned the United States government for a pension related to her service in the Civil War and as a Buffalo Soldier. I can only imagine how that conversation went, but the final disposition of the case was because her enlistment was not legal, she was never granted a pension. We do know that at some point Cathay married, but the marriage was an unhappy one as her husband stole her team of horses and all of her money, and she actually had to have him arrested. For me, this is the real sad part of the story. Even though we know that Cathay passed away in 1892, nobody knows exactly where her gravesite is, which I think is a real travesty of justice and a miscarriage of justice related to the historical significance that this one individual has. She led nothing short of an extraordinary life full of danger, hard work, and deception to stay alive. Historians theorize that as many as 400 women disguised themselves as men and served in the Civil War. What makes Cathay Williams unique is that she is the only known female to serve as a Buffalo Soldier. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Cathy's an amazing lady, and the Buffalo Soldiers are an amazing story, which I think we will probably cover in a later video. Don't be afraid to like and subscribe.